Today, we're diving into something truly revolutionary. We're going to talk about teaching AI to speak the language of life itself. Yeah, I'm talking about those silent, incredibly complex conversations happening between the trillions of cells that make you, well, you. So let's get right into it.
First things first, to really get what a huge challenge this is, you have to appreciate the scale we're talking about. This isn't just about understanding one little cell. It's about a whole, sprawling, dynamic universe that exists inside every single one of us.
Get a load of this number, 37 trillion. Let that sink in for a second. That's the ballpark number of cells in the average adult human. And every single one of them is like its own bustling city, full of molecular machines, all talking to each other, all coordinating in ways we're just now finally starting to figure out.
And that right there is the big question. How in the world do you find the pattern in that much noise? How do you read a story that's being written by 37 trillion different authors all at the same time? It's a problem on a scale that's just hard to even wrap your head around.
So how do you even begin to tackle a problem like that? Well, this is where a pretty radical idea comes into play. Researchers are starting to ask, what if we stop thinking about all this biological data as just numbers in a spreadsheet? What if instead we treated it like a language with its own grammar, its own vocabulary, a language that we could teach an AI to read, and maybe, just maybe, one day even speak?
Okay, but before an AI can learn this new language, we need a Rosetta Stone, right? We have to figure out how to translate all the raw, messy data coming out of a cell into a format that a language model can actually understand.
And the most common way to do this is actually pretty clever. It's called cell-to-sentence. So here's how it works. First, you take a single cell and you measure the activity of thousands of its genes. You can think of it like looking at a city from above and seeing which lights are turned on the brightest. Then you just rank those genes, from most active to least active. And for the last step, you take the names of the top 100 or so most active genes and you just string them together. And boom, you've got a sentence that's basically a snapshot of what that cell was doing at that exact moment.
Now, there is a critical trade-off here. This method, it's kind of like trying to summarize a super dense legal document with just a single headline. It's fantastic at capturing the main idea. The key genes that tell you, hey, this is a liver cell. But in that process, you lose all the fine print. You lose all the subtle little interactions between the less active genes. And that fine print, well, that can be absolutely crucial for understanding how a cell might react to something like a new drug.
So once we have these cell sentences, a big debate has started to brew. There are basically two main schools of thought on how we should teach an AI to read them. You can think of it as the difference between a scholar who learns a new language from scratch by just immersing themselves in it versus an expert translator who's already mastered language and is just applying their skills to a new dialect.
So on one side, you have the scholars. These are what we call pre-trained language models, or PLMs. They get trained only on millions of these cell sentences, nothing else. The goal is for them to learn the unique grammar of biology through total immersion, kind of like moving to a new country to learn the language. Then on the other side, you have the interpreters. These are the large language models, LLMs, you've heard about, like the tech behind ChatGPT. These models have already read basically the entire internet, so they're masters of language and reasoning. The idea here is to just fine-tune them, to teach them how to apply all that existing knowledge to this new biological dialect.
Okay, so we've taught an AI to read the language of cells. That's cool. But the real question is, what can it actually do with that knowledge? Well, the applications are evolving super fast, and they're taking these AIs from being simple assistants to becoming really sophisticated virtual experts.
At the first level, we've got the AI as a co-pilot. So imagine you're a scientist. You can just upload a list of genes from your latest experiment, and the AI will instantly scan millions of scientific papers to find connections, generating plausible hypotheses for you in seconds. This saves researchers literally weeks, if not months, of tedious work.
The next step up is the expert. For this, AIs are trained on something called cell puzzles. The goal is to identify every single cell type in a given sample. But here's the twist. Each label can only be used once. This little rule forces the AI to think like a human biologist, to use context, to use the process of elimination to solve the puzzle, instead of just making a wild guess for each cell on its own. And what's really wild is what happens next. Without being explicitly programmed to do it, these AIs start developing strategies that look, well, shockingly human. They start to show self-reflection, going back and changing an answer when they find new evidence that contradicts it. They also use what's called curriculum reasoning. Basically, they solve the easy parts of the puzzle first to narrow down the possibilities for the harder parts. It's pretty amazing. And the most powerful approach we've seen so far? Creating a council of AIs. So instead of just trusting one model, you get a whole team of them, say GPT-4, Claude, and Gemini, and you have each one analyze the data. Then they literally debate their findings with each other, pointing out the evidence for their conclusions until they all agree on an answer. This method drastically cuts down on the errors and biases that any single model might have.
But for all this incredible progress, it's time for a little reality check. Because when we start testing these models on more complex biological problems, that lost in translation issue we talked about earlier, yeah, it comes roaring back. Take a look at this. This is the cell-verse benchmark. It's basically a standardized exam for these biological AIs. When we ask him to do cell annotation, which is just identifying what a cell is, the best models score about 61%. Okay, not amazing, but not bad. But look what happens when we ask a harder question, like predicting how a cell will respond to a drug. The score plummets to 55%. A random guess is 50%. So it's barely better than just flipping a coin.
And here is the absolute crucial point. Today's AIs are getting decent at learning correlations. They can see that a certain group of genes often shows up together, and that means it's a specific cell type. But they are completely failing at learning causation, at predicting how that cell will actually change when you do something to it, like add a drug. And that's because that kind of prediction requires understanding all that fine print that got lost in the translation. So, this gap, this chasm between correlation and causation, that defines the next great challenge for this entire field. It's a quest to move beyond just reading the language of life and towards something way, way more ambitious.
Because the ultimate goal here isn't just reading. It's about becoming fluent. We don't just want to classify cells. We want to be able to build a predictive, functional virtual cell right inside a computer. A simulation so accurate that we could test new drugs or gene therapies on it and get results in seconds without ever touching a test tube.
But look, making that happen, that's not something one lab or one company can do on its own. Just like the Human Genome Project, it's going to take a massive, global, coordinated effort to build the huge, high-quality, standardized data sets we need to teach an AI the true causal grammar of biology.
And all of this leaves us with one final, pretty profound question. Learning to read the language of our cells is one thing, but if we finally get there, if we achieve that fluency, if we actually learn to write in that language, what new cures, what new possibilities, and what new responsibilities will that bring? What story will we choose to tell?